Hello, I'm Rachel Henderson, a member of the Dole Institute Student Advisory Board. Welcome to the Dole Institute of Politics, and thank you for being with us. The Dole Student Advisory Board is composed of KU students committed to the bipartisan mission of the Dole Institute. Members of the SAB receive opportunities to network with guests and preference when applying for internship assistance or for paid student positions at the Institute. If you are a student and would like to join, please contact us. The Dole Institute would like to hear from you. If you enjoy this afternoon's program, please let us know by contacting us on Facebook, Twitter, or through our website email. Our past and future programs are available to watch on video on our website. We'd like to encourage each of you to consider becoming friends of the Dole Institute. Do so by returning the brochure on your chair at the end of today's program. Our friends help keep our programs free and open and support archive research and our student activities. I'd like to remind you to please turn off your cell phones. After the interview, we'll have time for question and answers. If you have a question, raise your hand and a student helper will come to you. Please ask just one brief question. Hearing assistance is available, and we have a loop section at each program designated by a sign. If you have any questions about the loop, or if at any time during the program you have difficulty hearing, please alert one of our staff members or student volunteers here in the hall and they can assist. And now, please welcome Director Bill Lacey.
Thank you. Thank you all for coming out today for our very first, our inaugural program of our Director Series. The idea is I will be selecting programs that have a special interest for me. It might be the topic, it might be the individual, but it'll be something that is especially interesting to me, and we'll be conducting these programs on a regular basis in the afternoon as another addition to our afternoon programming that we do here at the Dole Institute. Now, it's very fitting that for our very first session, we have a great friend of mine personally and a great friend of the Dole Institute with us today. Advance work is something that is not very well known outside presidential campaigns. It is one of the most critical elements of campaigns. Advanced men and women do incredible things that really can make or break a presidential campaign. And I'm sure you'll be hearing about some of those stories this afternoon. Stephen Jacques has been lead advance man for 8 Democratic presidential nominees. He's worked on a whole variety of other campaigns and different activities. He's worked in the White House. He's worked for the federal government. He has a fascinating background. He was selected as our first fellow at the Dole Institute of Politics 10 years ago. That's hard to believe, isn't it? 10 years ago now. And he worked with us a year replacing one of our associate directors who was on leave. And he's done a couple of other projects for us as well, and he's a great personal friend of mine. So please welcome back to the Dole Institute, Mr. Stephen Jacques.
I think it's awfully nice of you to have me in, given the scathing expose that I've done in the book about the Dole Institute of Politics.
Yes, right. We're all eager to hear about that too, right. Stephen. Let's start with a little bit more detail about you personally. Tell us a little bit about yourself, your education, and your career.
My education, my college education was constantly interrupted by political campaigns. It took me 10 years to get a bachelor's degree from the time I started. Constantly dropping out to go work in political campaigns. Southwest Missouri, statewide in Missouri for a congressman who was running for the U.S. Senate back in '76 by the name of Jerry Litton. And that was an education because Jerry Litton is still well known in Missouri as a guy who really was probably going to be the president of the United States someday. And by tragic happenstance, wound up then with the Carter campaign in '76. Invited down to Atlanta to come to a scheduling in advance seminar. It's the first time I'd ever heard of scheduling in advance. You know, what is advance all about? And they brought about 100 of us down to Atlanta for the general election, staffing up, gearing up period, and hired 30 of us to be the new advance people for Jimmy Carter for the campaign. And I was lucky enough to be chosen one of those people and started off on my advance career in '76 at that point. And then, you know, after the campaign was over, tried to go back to school, you know, kind of furtively did that, always out on the road, you know, doing advance when I could for the White House. The great thing about doing advance is you can drop in for 5 days, 4 days, 10 if it's an overseas trip, and then go back to what you were doing. So it's a very fast turnaround situation. And so through 77, I'd leave whenever I could to do advance for the White House because I had the opportunity as a kid. I was still only in my early 20s. And 78 then and got offered a job on the White House staff as an assistant to the vice president, and dropped out of school again then to go work in the White House staff. When the offer came in, I happened to be at my parents' house, and my mom looked at me, with a pained look in her eye and said, "Steve, what about school?" I said, "The White House, my country calls me." So I was able to go back to the White House and then take a leave of absence, and then during this Carter administration, and then go back and get my degree at WashU at the time in political science, and then go back and had a job waiting for me at the White House after I graduated from WashU. That was for the 79 and then into the 80 election. So I was very lucky in that regard to still be a kid and still be able to participate in a situation like that. Now it's not a big deal. You can be, there are 12-year-olds working at the White House. Back then it was unique.
Tell us, though, a little bit more about some of the campaigns after that.
76, went to work, as I said, in 78 for the White House, on the White House staff, so I was very deeply involved from 78 on. 79, worked at the campaign for a while as a Midwest and then Northeast, both Northeast and Midwest coordinator for the Carter-Mondale reelect, and then back to the White House for the year of 1980 to do advance, because it was just, it's a blast. It's the most fun you can have in politics. And I try to get that across in the book. As a matter of fact, it's challenging and fun and fast turnaround. You fill up a legal pad and you go to the next one. So after 80, I decided not to try to stay in Washington. I moved back to where I lived at the time, was St. Louis, and stayed there throughout the decade, working in 84 in the primary for Gary Hart in the primary, and then Mondale. Did a couple trips for Mondale in 80 and during the general. Same thing, 88, Gebhardt in the primary for a little while, and then a little bit for Dukakis just to keep my hand in, do 2 or 3 trips for Dukakis in the general. So it was a little bit more hit and miss in terms of my participation back then in presidential. I was doing a lot of St. Louis politics, a lot of local stuff at the time. And literally from the first campaign in politics, I was thinking about writing this book, because every advance trip pretty much is an adventure. And everybody always says, "Oh, you ought to write a book about this." If you've been on an advance trip, you've heard that. "Oh, you should write a book about this." So my fantasy was to write the book and have Cary Grant play the lead advance guy. That's how long ago I was thinking about this.
Not too late to still make the movie.
He'd be perfect now, since he's been dead for 20 years.
For those who are unaware, kind of talk about what an advance man or woman does. What's the role?
The role of advance, ultimately, the top of the mountain when you're doing advance is just to be right to what you're doing when you're doing all the other stuff that leads to it, is that 30 seconds or 45 seconds, if you're really lucky, on the evening news. Obviously, what the evening news has changed from 76 till now. But still, the evening news is powerful. And the same images work across the board in various applications in social media, and obviously the 24-hour news channels. But you basically are trying to control the output of the evening news, so does your non-paid political ad for your candidate. And you're going to get a horde of voracious consumers known as the national media, all putting out, you got no choice, there's going to be a story one way or the other. You're trying to manipulate that story a little bit so the right visuals are there, so they take the right piece of it with the right part of the audio clip to be the right audio to go with the right visual, and it basically becomes your non-paid political ad if you're really good at what you do. And sometimes you're whittling down hours and hours and hours of events to get that 30 seconds on the evening news that night. That exact right visual is going to be used across the board in print, now in social media. That's the point of it. The activity of the advance team is to control everything that leads to that. Make sure things that could become the trip don't become the trip, screw-ups, for instance. But you're doing the logistics, everybody's logistics, that the national traveling staff and the candidate and the press corps and thousands, up to thousands and thousands of participants if it's a huge rally. You have to choreograph all those 2 groups and get them there, get the press, get the public there. The press is going to show up one way or the other. And then when event day comes, you've got to make sure that your crowds don't intersect. And the candidate and the traveling staff is a crowd, and the press is a crowd, and the crowd is a crowd. And they all have to have their unique ways to get in and unique ways to get out that don't intersect. And you got to make sure that if the press needs to get out and get to a particular place right after that, that they can get out first. Back in the old days, it was making sure they could file their stories. The film would have to go on a motorcycle to the airport and get there in time to get to New York so it could be edited, or to some other place so it could be shot to a satellite and edited for the evening news. Not quite the same way these days, but that was part of the excitement in the 70s and 80s. So, you know, you had to get it out to the airport, to some place where they could edit this stuff. And basically, you want to control the evening news and the next morning news cycle, and that's the point of Advance. But you're doing all the logistics too, and hotels, anything that could possibly have an impact, and making sure that the press is in such a mind that they are willing to accept the story that you give them, because they're kind of at your mercy, and you have to ensure that the public is ready to accept your message and be the right visual, because basically they are a visual when it comes to TV. The local crowd becomes your visual. You have to ensure that their receptivity is correct, and you have to ensure that the ability of the press to amplify that message.
I want to show people the complexity of what you do, and talk a little bit about the size of a team, what different components you have in an advance team, who would be reporting to the lead advance person.
It's varied through the years, and it's really grown through the years. Back in the day, back in '76 and in the '70s, I could have a team that was as small as just me doing advance for the Vice President of the United States. 3 people was not unheard of, and it would be generally a press person and a general site person or logistics person who would also do the motorcade. It's grown considerably, and now there's always a site person for every site, a press one or press lead, but it's press one. There's only one lead advance. And then there's always a backup for that. So there's at least 2 press people. Then a site person for every single site, and guaranteed a motorcade person. And depending on what kind of event, there could be a crowd person or 2 or 3, depending on the size of the crowd. And I've had advances that were as short as 24 hours. When John Edwards was going to be announced as the vice presidential running mate, and 24 hours to put together a 20,000 person rally in Florida from the time I arrived to the time I got there. And that till the time he got there. And that was a fairly large team, about 10 people, because we were on the move so quickly. But generally it's going to be about 6 to 8 people on an advance team. And the press advance are the only people who should be actually dealing with the press, giving them logistics. We're all off the record. We're supposed to be invisible. Now, while we're very visible to the people we work with on the ground, we're supposed to be invisible to the press. And I push that in the book. We're supposed to be like the secret agents of a campaign. All this stuff that happened, that occurred, a rally with 30, 40,000 people, and all the signs, and the press in just the right areas, and their ability to get the shot over all that just happened. That just happened. There was nobody actually doing that. So to the extent that you can, stealth is on your side. Talk to the press. So there's not a huge press component. You're just manipulating the press in that regard.
How do people get to be an advance man or advance woman, or get to be part of an advance team?
It helps to be on the ground and to just volunteer, quite frankly. Sending letters to the White House is I found almost ridiculous. Expressing an interest by mail. You're better off, for any of the young people, going and helping on an advance team and getting to know the people who are doing it so they can call you. I had an occasion during the Clinton administration doing a trip to San Diego, and the White House asked me if maybe I could use a couple of people, local people in San Diego, who had expressed an interest in doing advance, and they'd give me a list, and I expected a list of 5 or 10 people. There had to be 300 names on this list of people who had just written in page after page after page after page of people who just knew about advance and had written to the White House and wanted to be involved. I had no idea how to involve. I mean, which ones do you pick? So there's a lot of competition even for that. And during the campaign, there's literally 500 people who want for every job in advance. And it helps to participate, to volunteer, to go where they are, and to be there and get to know the people, or to have a father or mother who's a congressman, or a donor, big donor. I mean, just to be sadly true about it, if you've got some kind of connections, it'll help.
We're going to have, we're actually selling Stephen's book today, and so you can pick up a copy of it if you didn't get a copy before, and you can get a copy after. But tell us a little bit about the book.
The book is essentially 72 hours in the life of a lead advance person, a lead advance man. for a fictitious African-American candidate for president during the 2008 campaign, right in between the New Hampshire primary and the South Carolina primary. And it's 1 week, it's 72 hours basically from the time this lead character gets the word he's got to do some stuff in South Carolina, in the Charleston area, until the time he has to pull it off. And in that sense, it echoes, it's all based on things that really happened with a few plot twists that are dramatic. But it's, you know, it's based on my experience of showing up in town sometimes and really always being astounded. Sitting in a place, I'll be there the first person, even if by chance I beat the Secret Service there. And by happenstance, finding a really great place to do the event that I'm going to do, that I'm planning to do. And nobody else is there yet. But sitting and thinking, you know, in 2.5 days, there's going to be 35,000 people sitting here. And Obama's going to be there, and the press is going to be there, and I'm going to get them in over there, and the press and the public is going to come there and there. And these are going to be the visuals behind, and this is where I'm going to put the staff holding room. And I'm the only person in the world who knows about it at this moment. And it's 2.5 days away. And I think that's amazing, and we will do it. And we do it. People show up, and we pull it together, and it's done. How it's done every time, it's almost an enigma to me even, but we pull it off. So that's the fun aspect of things. So I wanted to capture that kind of fast pace of advance and kind of the can-do attitude of advanced people who believe if they're good enough, if they're arrogant enough, that they can do anything, and that's a good thing. Not arrogance so much, but confidence that they can do anything. Mm-hmm. Because basically you have to deal with anything. And it's fun to work around advanced people who think they're the best in the world. You know, all the advanced people, you want them to think that they're the best in the world, so they can handle these things. And also the aspect in the book of, you know, good guys and bad guys. It's, you know, almost any of us can be either one of those given the opportunity, you know, what we want out of a given situation. And I wanted to show that there were, you know, it wasn't quite so black and white, that there were good guys and bad guys. They were in the political staff, there were good guys and bad guys. In the Secret Service, it was actually tough to find a bad guy in Secret Service. After 36 years, I had to combine two kind of semi-annoying Secret Service agents I'd worked with to make one really bad one. It was tough, and it never really occurred to this extent. And local pals that want what they want out of every advance trip when some big shot's come into town, whether it's a candidate or a president. So I was trying to capture all that and the ability of the advance team to overcome.
How do you reward, because I know the answer to this, but I want you to talk to the folks about it. How do you reward volunteers who play roles in advance?
Well, there's
lots of currency in politics other than cash.
Without a doubt. There's the ever powerful meet and greet where you can give a handshake and a photo to somebody who's really been good. There's the chum, as they called it. Oh, I was back in the Carter administration. I had a problem. Since I was on the White House staff and I could talk to a lot of people, don't call the stuff that we send you, the little cufflinks and things, don't call it trinkets. It demeans it. Call it memorabilia or whatever. But when you give it to people, don't call it trinkets. Well, when I did my first event for the Clinton administration, this box of stuff showed up, and somebody said, the chum box is here. And I knew exactly what they meant. I laughed myself silly. So now it's been reduced to chum. You throw out the chum. Well, there's a whole philosophy that goes with the goodies. The biggest thing, as I said, is the meet and greet and the handshake and a photo that goes with the candidate. But if you've got a 5 or 6 day advance and you've got a lot of big stuff to tackle, you know, the volunteers can get worn out. You know, in the beginning, everybody's kind of enthused, but by middle of the trip, you can tell who's going to work for you and who's not going to work for you, and they're starting to kind of wind down a little bit in terms of their enthusiasm. So that's when you get out the chum to get everybody their first big, you know, you give out to the people who are going to give to you, who are going to really put out for you. You know who those people are going to be, and it gets them really wound up. And for those that don't get it, it gets them wound up to try to get some chum. And then the day before is another good day when people are really, when you need them to be wound up, but they're kind of getting wound up anyway. And day of, that you know, that gold mine of having a handshake and a photo with the candidate. Back during the early Carter campaign in '76, we had these little gold peanuts that cost like a nickel each to have done. We'd have doctors and lawyers that would kill. They'd shine your shoes for these little gold peanuts that you had to get for the lapel. It was remarkable what they would do for these things. And they were just so as time went on, our chum got better. And we'd even create our own chum. got some great carry pins I should have brought and sold here. Some say carry staff. Well, we just made them ourselves. You know, people got a kick out of getting those things. So those, as you say, can be very powerful, and when done, you know, with a great philosophy in mind. And this is my little philosophy that I thought up just through trial and error. Midweek is when you really need that chum to come out.
Mm-hmm. Okay.
Does that answer your question?
Yeah. Absolutely. No, that's exactly what I wanted you to talk about. What percent of the book is autobiographical?
Oh,
is it largely?
With the exception of the kind of the dramatic elements. I threw in an international component, and even that was based on people I know. The rest of it are all true stories from my career.
Okay.
So all the weird stuff.
So you drew from multiple campaigns and experiences then.
Yeah, it's all the way going back to, you know, a lot of the individual characters are composites, and yeah, a lot of these experiences happened in different campaigns. It's set during, as I said, the 2008 campaign, but a lot of these things happen in earlier campaigns. Earlier campaigns, there were fewer rules. You could get away with a little bit more. People were, you know, just advanced people were known for getting away with a little bit more. So yeah, it's all basically true story. You draw on what you know, and this particular book focuses on a veteran advanced guy who's been doing this for decades and decades, and you know, you take it from the perspective of a geezer advanced guy.
Why did you decide to write fiction instead of nonfiction?
First of all, it's tougher to write nonfiction in a situation like this and be interesting, because it is, you know, it's kind of plotting in a sense. If you do an advance, it's the most exciting thing you'll do. If you write about an advance, it can be rather plotting, and what happened can come across as rather dry. Advanced people are known for not talking. We're known, again, for being invisible. We don't talk to the press. So to out specific situations and specific people who may have done, you know, I mean, what are you going to put in? A how-to book? Or if you put in screw-ups, then people are offended, and you kind of don't talk about those things. There is a bit of a code of ethics among advanced people. So I wanted to tell the truth. I wanted to talk about people in a very realistic way, and it's a way of actually getting closer to the truth when you write fiction. And I felt much less constrained in that regard. As a result, you know, these characters took on the life of real people.
Talk about the craft of writing the book. I don't believe you'd written any fiction before this novel, right?
No, and I don't read that much fiction as a problem. I don't like somebody else's little stories. And so I'm a real nonfiction guy. And so to come up with a form for this is very difficult. And as you know, I met a lady here by the name of Antonia Felix, who's a wonderful writer. She's written several biographies. One was a New York Times bestseller on Sonia Sotomayor. Met her here. She lives in Minnesota now. Contacted her, and she agreed to be my coach. So she was helping coach me read this thing, and you need to move up the action. You need to, you know, get into these things a little bit faster. My sister recommended one book that was a novel that I read that really gave me the best information in terms of writing scenes for this book, and it was trial and error over 3 years of just, you know, wishing I drank, because it was just, seriously, it was just, I wished, you know, there was no relief from the trial and error aspect of it. But once you get down the format of writing scenes and keeping the action moving, keeping track of your characters, because who knew at the beginning 3 years ago that I'd be referring to a character, you know, what's the name? Who is this person? I forgot him. I didn't keep a list. Who populated my novel? So that was critically important. And finding people to proofread your book is the most incredibly important aspect of this. You need people who can proofread and critique. So that was my biggest help, but it was mostly trial and error. Did
you have an average day, so to speak, while you were writing the book? I mean, I've read that some authors say, well, I'm going to get up at a certain time, I'm going to write between the hours of 8 to noon, and that's going to be it for the day. I'm going to leave it behind and go get refreshed and everything. Did you have any kind of schedule like that you followed?
Yeah, I tried to be at my desk at 7 a.m. And my problem is I'm not a morning person, but I make up for it by not being an afternoon person either. So, so I would at least be at my desk by 7. If I fudged it till 7:30, I didn't feel real guilty about it. Truly, I would drink a couple cups of coffee. Couldn't drink more because I'm a lightweight, and that's, you know, that was another problem I had. More coffee. You think Theodore Roosevelt writing, he's downing gallons of coffee. I thought, well, that'll be my trick. I'll just drink a lot of coffee. Well, that didn't work. That just made me like this. So it was just a matter of getting up every day and gutting it out for a few hours. And if the mood was striking me, I'd stick around past noon. And if it wasn't, then I would go ahead and move on to my normal life after that. But no, it was basically I tried to be there every day. And weekends the same, 7 a.m., just to crank out some work so I could pitch it out later.
How did you go about organizing the plot and then kind of working your own experiences into it? Did you start with a list of stories that you are really interesting experiences that you'd had in your career and then work them into the plot, or did you start with a plot and work them
both
in that way?
Both and none of the above. I know that an advanced trip has all the elements of a great story. I mean, you've got rising action, and you've got climax, and you've got falling action, and I wanted to capture all that and capture this cast of characters who I'd come in contact through the years, and these types in some ways that I'd come in contact through the years. I wanted to capture all these people. So I had characters in mind, I had situations in mind, I had a beginning, middle, and an end in mind, although I wasn't sure where the end was going to go. The concept of an advance is a structure in itself. So I utilize that like I would in a countdown meeting. You'll read in the book if you get a chance. In a countdown meeting, I just follow the schedule. Basically in this, I just followed basically what my schedule would be in advance. I knew what I would start doing and what the middle part of the day would be, and just day by day what the critical aspects were going to be. So the structure, really lent itself to being able to write a book. It was the editing that was the tough part, which parts to edit out to make sure that the story was moving ahead. And ultimately, Antonia had me write a paragraph or page by page outline that was like 60 pages long of just an outline of what the book would be. So that was kind of my last little bit of a guide. And after that, then I just sat and wrote. I knew it was going, and it just came out after much agonizing. It didn't just come out. I mean, it did come out.
Right.
After I beat it out of me.
You've had lots of interesting experiences, not necessarily from the book, but share one of your funnier stories that you have from all your years in advance work with all these different candidates.
Well, my funniest stories are ones that I can never relate in public, so sorry. You're not gonna get any of those. The one that one of my friends said, "You're going to dine on this story for the rest of your life," so I didn't put it in the book. Was shot at for doing a pre-advance in a helicopter over the Gaza Strip one time. That wasn't exactly funny, but it was after the fact.
You're not exaggerating, are you, Stephen?
That's right. Well, Brian Williams and I were in this helicopter. No, it's I guess one of the ones that where I was chagrined more than anything, but it was kind of both a peak moment and my sad moment on the road. Was summer of 2008. I was sent to Las Vegas to do a trip for Obama, and they kept sending me back to Las Vegas. I kept saying, "Don't send me to Las Vegas. I don't want to work in Las. I don't want to be there. I don't drink. I don't gamble. Just don't send me there." So I'd annoy them by making them put us up at a Hampton Inn like 20 minutes from the Strip. But this particular time, there were no hotel rooms available off the Strip, and they put us up at Caesar's Palace, which is the only union hotel. And I had no choice. And Caesar's Palace is lovely. There's no coffee makers in the room. The television stinks. You got to walk 50 minutes to get to your car through the it's awful. You got to drive out of town because there's actually a city there, and you got to drive away from the Strip to do anything. And so I was miserable, and I was whining for the entire week that I was there. It was like 5 days. Anybody who would listen on the phone, that's staff meetings, whatever. And wasn't really paying much attention to the schedule, but he arrived like at 6 o'clock when we got there, and he went up to his suite, and Marvin Nicholson, the trip director, and Robert Gibbs, the press secretary, came down to have dinner with me. And Marvin was an inveterate gambler. Anywhere we were, he was going to gamble, the trip director. And you still see him. He's a big, tall guy. He's always next to Obama. And he'd always lose. He was the worst gambler in the entire world. I never saw him win. And he came down and he said something about playing poker later. And I said, "No, well, if you want to come." I said, "No, thanks. I appreciate it." "Well, none of us are very good, did it?" I said, "What am I going to do, watch?" No, well, he realized I wasn't paying attention. He goes, "No, you don't understand. We're playing poker later with the boss up in his suite, and he wants to know if you want to come and play." "Oh, in that case, yes." So I was upstairs with Obama at 7 o'clock to play poker, and Marvin, and there were 6 of us total. And so we started playing like 7:15, and this is cool. We're playing poker in Obama's suite all night long. So I tried to bring up the next day. We had, The View was going live in front of Caesar's Palace. This is perfect. It's Kismet. Just like the old days when like Frank Sinatra would do a walk-on to Johnny Carson or Dean Martin. Let's do a walk-on. Michelle had just been on The View. She was a big hit. Barbara Walters had been telling the story on herself that I'd heard, like on Leno, that she'd forgotten that she met Obama. She saw him at a party and said, "You should be on our show." And he said, "I was on your show." And she said, "Oh, I'm sorry I wasn't there." And he said, "You were there." So this is perfect. They're going live. They're going to be there right out in front. Let's do a walk-on. And I've been kind of conspiring with their producer all week. So I figured this is going to be a good moment. I'm playing poker with the big guy and beating him pretty badly. And so I tried to bring that up. Zip. No talking. This is business. This is pleasure. We don't mix the two. Tried to bring it up another time. Nothing. All right, fine. I get the hint. We're not talking business. So we had a pleasant evening. At one point, I related how Roosevelt had played poker from time to time back in the 30s with some of the press guys at the White House. And when he lost, he'd pay off his losses with a check. And I said, nobody ever cashed his checks. So Obama gave me one of those smiles. He has his cards. He gives me one of these Obama smiles. So get your checks done now. So anyway, when we broke up about 1:30 at night, fun evening. And my wife called sometime during the evening. I said, let me call you back later. She goes, well, I figured something was up. And so he actually brought it up. What's this deal about tomorrow in The View? So I explained it to him. And I said, here's your line. You walk in and say, I just came in to introduce myself to Barbara Walters. I'm Michelle Obama's husband. My name's Barack. Well, it's the summer of '08. It's a great line. He goes, well, that's a good line, but I feel like I'd be stepping on Michelle. So he said, let's think about it. We'll talk about it tomorrow. It's like, all right, fine. So it's 7 a.m. and I'm at his door. And he looks at me. He's going to work out. He goes, what? I said, The View. He said, I thought we nixed that. No, we didn't nix that. You got to do this thing. Well, let me think about it. So anyway, I sent Robert Gibbs. I went down to Gibbs' room. I said, go down and talk to him. Gibbs came back up and said, he won't do it. He feels like he'd be stepping on Michelle. I got so miffed I stopped talking to him. So as that day, he could tell I just wasn't dealing with him at all. We were doing some other stuff. We're going into a little town hall meeting about midway through the day. And he's walking past me. He just taps me on the shoulder. He goes, it's okay. And I said, if we lose, it's because of this. You wouldn't do this thing. So there's my semi-amusing, dining on, playing poker for the first time in his suite with Obama. But yeah, I thought I was like this with him after that.
That's great. It's a great story. Your book's fiction, but what real lessons and information should people take away from it? Because it really, like you say, it's based on your career.
Well, in a sense, there's just the simple knowledge that advance exists in what these people are doing. So when you're watching television, you can, you have a feel and have a sense for what's, how did all that get there? Why is it there? Why is that image that we see there in the first place? Why does it stink, or why is it meaningless, or why does it help to graphically represent the message that the candidate's giving? So in that sense, you can be a little bit more critical watchers to know what's going on behind the scenes, because a lot of people just assume the Secret Service does all this. Several people who've read it said, I thought Secret Service did that. Kind of the conundrum that you have between the enjoyment and the optimism of being a true believer in the political system, and how much it kind of takes away from you and makes you a little soulless in some ways when you have your doubts and your questions about whether the political system works as well as it should. That's another one of the things that I kind of examine through all that, and kind of the personal relationships that go with it, and the types that you see around the country. So you can have a kind of and just to be amused. It's supposed to be funny. I mean, I will say that in public now. People do find it as amusing as I tried to make it. There's supposed to be a laugh a page. I tried to make it entertaining. That's very much kind of the environment that I tried to create on the road, to make everybody have a good time. I wanted everybody to walk away having a good time. After the president or the candidate leaves, the media may ask them, how was it? I want to have smiling, happy faces left behind when they say, it was great, it was the best time I ever had. So there's a positive reason for doing it other than just wanting people to feel good. But I just kind of want people to feel good anyway. So there was that I wanted to try to create, to capture that environment that we try to create.
Okay. I have one final question, then I'm going to open it up to Q&A from the audience. We'll take as many as we have time for today. But can you talk a little bit about reaction you may have gotten from colleagues? I've heard from several individuals who are political practitioners who know the critical importance of advance and who understand fundamentally that good advance is not really noticed, but bad advance is a disaster in a campaign. But what kind of reaction have you gotten from colleagues and friends that you've worked with in the past to the book?
It's been interesting. It's run the gamut. It's actually just run the extremes. From some people who just won't comment about it at all, and maybe they just didn't read it because it's a big book and it requires literacy. And some people and several of my closest friends and the people whose opinions I value the most have been ecstatic, have been surprisingly wild about it. One friend, Jean-Michel Pichet, who is actually here.
Yes.
I sent it to him. He's a friend whose character is in the book is Mike Pitcher in the book. And he's dual citizenship with the United States and New Zealand. Well, I had Jean-Michel when I was a fellow here. Jean-Michel Pichet is the guy's name. And he's one of the guys I worked with as a site person many, many times. And Jean-Michel's a good-looking guy, and he was single at the time, and it made no difference. Because when I said his name to my study group, when I said next week we're going to get Jean-Michel Pichet to come, you could see the girls, the students going, oh, Jean-Michel Pichet. Anyway, so I took his cachet away from him and made him Mike Pitcher in the book. And he's dual citizenship with Canada, so I made it dual citizenship with New Zealand. Anyway, what was the question you asked?
The reaction you've gotten from colleagues.
Jean-Michel just had a child. He's married. He has a 3-year-old girl. And he said when she gets old enough, when she asks what was advance all about, he said, I'm going to give her this book. He said this is the first time that anybody's captured it. But the fact of the matter is there are no books on the subject. We don't talk about advance. It's like Fight Club. The first rule of Fight Club is you don't talk about Fight Club. There was one book in 1971 called The Advance Man by Jerry Bruno. It was so uneventful for me, I've forgotten even what it said. I read it back in the day. And it's nonfiction. So I wanted to capture a little bit more of the ambiance of it and to be, as I said, to be able to tell more truths. So some of the people have been, but the older guys haven't responded at all. I think maybe there's, I've got a couple guys who are actually older than I who will still go out and do advance. One guy's in his mid-70s, and he goes to like Siberia to do advance for Biden. The old guys haven't responded in the least, and the young guys have been very positive. So, other people who are less involved, but politically involved, but less involved in advance, have been wildly complimentary, which I've been pleased about. Vlad Zimbayev, who you know, and his two Foreign Service diplomats. Vlad's been here before. They wrote things for the Amazon Review that were amazing and surprising. So, she was Nancy. These are State Department people. The wife got on the phone with me, and she was effusive. I've never heard her be effusive in her life. When the Berlin Wall came down, she wasn't effusive. She was effusive about the book, which was nice to hear. So, but some of the old advanced guys haven't really responded. I find that interesting.
Yeah. Well, you're aware that our mutual friend, who is a fellow here, who's a Republican friend of mine, Wilma Goldstein, just raved about the book. So, anyway. Okay, time for Q&A from you. We'll start back here with Mark. We'll get you a microphone in just a second.
Thank you, Bill. I'm Mark Johnson. I actually have 2 questions. I'll ask them quickly. First, when does advance start? And the reason I ask that is you said you did advance for candidate Carter. In the spring of '75, a buddy of mine and I drove from New Haven down to LaGuardia to personally pick up this candidate who had just announced that he was going to be running for president, a former Georgia governor. And he gets off the plane with Ham Jordan, and the 4 of us squeeze into my friend's convertible to drive back to New Haven. So that's the spring of '75. So when does advance actually start? And then my second question is there a difference, if you know, between doing advance for a Democratic candidate and a Republican candidate?
I touched on that a little bit in the book. The time for advance has gotten earlier and earlier as the decades have gone on. Obviously, you're talking the spring of '75 for a November of '76 election. And I do actually know 2 of the very first advance guys who worked for Jimmy Carter. And they were there. They were just doing bigger events. They were going where they could go. Scott Douglas is one of them. And he was just a kid. He was 14 when he started working for Jimmy Carter when he was governor. So it has moved up. Obviously, the very first trip that Obama did as a nominee, as an announced candidate, was February 11th of 2011. A little bit earlier than the spring of '75 that you're referring to. We had a full-blown, advance operation, and no Secret Service then, but we got Secret Service very soon after. Well, with Kerry, we didn't get Secret Service until after, it was March of 2004. So it was an entire year later that John Kerry got Secret Service. We had it by May, June, at the latest, June of 2011. 2007 for Obama. So it's gotten shorter and depends on who it is. If it's Chris Dodd running and he's going to Iowa, he might be out there with just him and his staff. He may not have any kind of advance at all. So it depends on who the candidate is and how much money they have. So it varies. I don't know if Santorum's got advanced people right now. Rand Paul probably just doing his thing and counting on local people, people or Jeb Bush. Wouldn't you think he's got an advanced person?
Oh yeah, I think so. Yeah.
Yeah, he's got somebody out there already. He's got the resources to do that. Back in the day, the differences between Democrat and Republican advance people. I was exposed to Republican advance people in '83. George Bush came to town. George Bush, the vice president, came to St. Louis, and a friend of mine did motorcades for him in town. And I told him, look, if you get stuck, I'll do your motorcade. I'd already worked for Carter. I'd already worked for the White House staff. I'd been the lead. But I thought it'd be interesting to see it from a Republican standpoint. So last minute, he said, yep, sure enough, I need somebody, come and work. So I met a young lady and dated her for a while after that who was one of the advance people and saw how the Republicans worked, and they were much more regimented than us. Democrats were always you're the most important person on the ground. You're the eyes and ears of the candidate or the president or the vice president. And when the staff comes to town, they counted on you. I mean, you're doing all the creative stuff, you're calling the shots, you direct the scene, you're the one who's literally leading the candidate or the president or the vice president. And I had experiences where I was surprised that, one of those guys was on me when I'd make a little dipsy doodle and they'd go, oop, just because I wanted to do something. They were literally following me. Republicans, I noticed that their advanced people, even back in the 80s, were basically the most important people on the ground until everybody showed up. They were really much more regimented. They were doing things, really the logistics, the nuts and bolts, not as much creative staff. As the years have gone on, Democrats have become more and more like that. Now that they can, kind of see the headquarters, whether it's the White House or headquarters, can see and hear and smell, and touch just about everything the advance can see and smell and touch, due to technology. They've become more and more constrained, and as a result, much more proscribed in terms of what they're capable of doing. And it takes somebody, like me who kind of fights back, no, we're going to do it like this, it's going to be a much better visual. But it's become kind of by regimented, just almost along the same lines as Republicans. Now, I think the technology and the systems and the Secret Service, because they're an ongoing piece of this action that evolves, it changes, but it doesn't change. It always evolves. Sometimes to my chagrin, sometimes without telling me in the midst, in the middle of a trip, things evolve. So anyway, but that was basically the difference. I always thought that we were more creative staff and that we were really guys in charge, and Republicans didn't have that. Well, not so much anymore.
Okay, other questions? We have a question right here.
This lady, okay. This lady was here
Okay.
first.
Wait for the mic, please, ma'am.
Oh, the mic. Oh, sure. I'm curious about are advanced men paid in advance? Do you have a draw? Turning in like your travel expenses, hotels, all of that, and who handles the finances? Let's say for a group of there's just one head advanced man, but your staff that would work under you. Where does that come from?
Yeah, from the teams.
What pocket does that come out of?
Are you asking about during campaign or during the White House?
Well, let's do campaigns.
Well, campaign it's all campaign money,
Yeah.
and yes, advanced people are except for the lowest people who start maybe just as expenses, just to get their start in advance. Maybe they'll start at the lowest level, and all they're offered is expenses to begin with.
So I take it that during your sabbaticals, between your education, what did you finally get into? Was it accounting major at the Washington, or what was your major from college?
I dropped out of school so often. I had such a poor Illinois college, Southwest Missouri State University at the time, had such a poor record that I was on the White House staff before I got into Washington University. And the only reason they accepted me is because I was already on the White House staff. And they said, well, you have pretty interesting references. And I said, yep. So I was able to talk my way into Wash U of all things. I mean, a good school. And and the only thing I could do at the time was political science, because that's, I was, and then, at the time I'm taking classes and I'm going off, and one day I'm with the President of the United States. The next day I'm in class, doing, hanging out. So, and I had mostly political science teachers, so they couldn't exactly complain. And the one semester that I left, which was the off-year election, 78, fall of 78, I was only in school for a week and a half. I got my best grades of my entire college career. Being gone was good. My presence was a detriment.
On-the-job training.
Yes, exactly. Nobody could complain. So it was political science to begin with.
Okay.
All right, other questions?
I had always heard that Jimmy Carter was kind of a micromanager.
Yeah.
And I'm just wondering how deeply presidential candidates or presidents got involved with advancement, if at all, and which person did you work with who was most in control and least in control?
We're being taped, aren't we? I keep forgetting that. Truly, their personalities varied. Carter is, he truly is, a memory expert. He fancies himself to be a memory expert. And he, micromanager, I guess, at my level, it didn't make itself so apparent because the questions and the answers are kind of on a micro level at that, just by the nature of things at that point. When you're on a trip and, who's he seeing next, what's the situation, which way do I need to go, even, things like that. Jimmy Carter, I'd have my legal pad for him, and I'd write down all the movements and all the names and all the people he's going to see on my legal pad. And it'd be stage by stage, so it wasn't the whole thing, but for the first step, I'd go up the stairs of Air Force One and to brief him, and he'd take the legal pad and look at it, and read it, and go, okay, and hand it back to me. And he'd remember everything along the way. I mean, remember the names, he'd remember the movements, the whole bit. With Vice President Mondale, I had like 4 sets of briefing cards, one for me, one for him, one for his assistant, and another set just in case. And Vice President Mondale referred to his briefing cards to get all the same information, but he wasn't going to try to remember it off the top of his head. So that showed kind of a difference in personality right there. But you don't feel the micromanagement aspect of things quite as much at that level, because it is the micro level. I mean, you're trying to control what's happening on a national level in terms of national press, but everything's happening kind of on a micro level anyway. They're all interesting people. Vice President Mondale was interesting to work with. He would, if things went wrong, by the time we got to the next trip, the next event, he was fine again already. I mean, he did hold things over you. He was pretty wonderful to work with in that regard. He liked his advanced people to be upbeat. And being a punk at the time, I pushed that to the limit, and he thought it was amusing. I had, pardon an anecdote, but 79 we were doing the re-elect for Carter and Mondale, and I had Mondale in December of 79, maybe early January of 80, in Bangor, Maine, cold as hell outside, and we had to do a press conference, and I was looking for a way as a small press conference type of situation, and I was looking for a place to do it that was interesting, that would scream Bangor, Maine, that everybody would know about. I found the Hannibal Hamlin home in Bangor, Maine. Who's the Hannibal Hamlin, you ask? He was Vice President of the United States under Abraham Lincoln, believe it or not. First term. Nobody's ever heard of him. And I figured this is a good place to do things for Vice President Mondale. Perfect. So I set it up outdoors in the cold and got some space heaters, some stadium heaters to keep everybody warm in the cold. And we got there, just out on the motorcade we go. It's set up, but we still had just a couple of seconds to set up the mult box, the little ending part to the audio part, so all the press can plug into the mult box to get their sound. We just had to wait a few seconds. It was almost the death of me. And in that few seconds, I'm standing huddling in the cold with Vice President Mondale. And I said, you know, Mr. Vice President, you've got a lot in common with Hannibal Hamlin besides being Vice President. You know, this is going off. He likes his advanced guys to be upbeat, be fun. He goes, oh, what's that? And I said, well, he's as famous now as you'll be in 100 years. Mondale gave me the look. He just looked at me. He just looked, and he kept looking at me as he walked to the microphone. He just kept looking over his shoulder at me as he walked away. Didn't say anything. Well, I found out later that he thought it was amusing, but he wasn't going to tell me. But his administrative assistant told me later he got a kick out of it, but he wasn't going to let on. So, but you know, being young and stupid, you make those mistakes.
Other questions? We have a few more.
Yeah, and kind of to follow up on her, if you're not working with the administration that wins, what do you do in the off time between campaigns, like?
Yeah, that's always been the problem. That's always been the problem. If you've noticed, I mean, I had a streak going. I was available for smaller or longer times to do advance, you know, over the space of 9 cycles, 76 through 2008. And it's a problem. What do you do in between? I do public affairs. I do consulting mostly for not-for-profits and municipalities. And in the 80s, when I went back to St. Louis, it was working for a couple of different firms that were doing that. And then I was able to get away and do 84 and 88. When I came back from the Clinton administration in 2001, I was at UMKC for a year and a half as the vice chancellor for public affairs, and I thought that was wonderful. That was great. I would have stayed there. But for other reasons I didn't. But then I went with Kerry and spent a year on the road with Kerry, and was very lucky in that regard because during the Kerry campaign, this guy named Bill Lacey called from the Dole Institute and I said, well, I can't talk now, but I'll call you after the election's over, assuming I'm not going to need to go to the Dole Institute. He just wanted me to participate in a program. Well, I'm going to be too damn busy. I'll be in Washington watching President Kerry getting sworn in. So I told him I'd call him back. Well, guess what? I needed to call him back after the election was over. And he asked me to come in to do a program, and then brought up the possibility of me coming in to be a fellow there that next semester. So it's always a problem. I mean, what do you do in between if that's what you want to do? And after I left UMKC, I'd made kind of a determination that I was going to go for the muse. I was going to do it all. I was going to try to do what I really love doing, which is politics, and go for it and see what happened. Well, I found out. I ended up writing a book.
So it's interesting.
At the very minimum, it's interesting. Hopefully.
You mentioned that advanced men are responsible for the visuals in the campaign. So I assume that an advanced man was responsible for the mission accomplished banner on the aircraft carrier.
Yes.
And if so, did heads roll after that, or was it just completely ignored by those in the know?
Oh, no, that guy, and I forget his name. I think it was Roger Jensen. Roger, he looks like a perfect Republican. I mean, just, you know, and I'm not dissing him name, but tall and blonde and good looking and Aryan, and just, he is the, if you're going to pick a Republican, this guy looks like the part. And I worked with him several times. He was there doing the debates. He was still working at a very high level doing the debates. And he was just Mr. Accomplished to me, Mr. Mission Accomplished to me. That's what I called him. And he got a kick out of it because he thought that was just great. But it was a great event. I mean, they spent $70,000 just to float a barge of lights with lighting out there to watch. 70 grand just for one barge of lights. I mean, that's an event. I mean, if you're an advanced person, you think you've hit your penultimate to do something like that. And to blow it with with an overachieving banner that really ends up being a detriment is kind of it's kind of a slap in the face. And I felt badly for him. No, God, no. Generally, it's Democrats who fail up. I mean, Democrats, if you screw up badly enough, you're going to get a promotion. But usually, Republicans are probably a little bit better. But no, that was fine. That was not viewed as I don't believe, as any kind of a screw up on his part. I'm sure he got it approved. So whoever did it, but it was his idea.
Yeah. I would assume in that case that Stephen's right, that probably he wasn't the one who said, let's put that sign up there. So.
Yeah, he did recommend it, but he's not the one who said, yeah, you can do it.
I think I heard that it was really for the ship, that they had come home.
After the fact? Yeah.
I mean, that's what I...
It may have been. It may have been, yeah, and it may not have been. I mean, whatever the excuse was after that. Yes, mission accomplished. You have a tendency to go overboard, and I've been shot down a couple times in my attempts. I'm known, and never been shot down but I'm known for utilizing space. I mean, if we've got a big space, I'm going to give you 30-foot banners. I mean, if it's going to be there, and I'm the only one apparently who does it these days. And you know, you'll see my events, and you'll see these big banners going. Topeka, Brown versus Board of Education with Kerry in '04. But I tried to do a thing with Gore in 2000 on the riverboat trip just after the convention, where I had a land-going fake of a riverboat to take him from the levee where we had a dock up, you know, on the Mississippi River up to where we had a rally, and it was all done up. And Tipper said, "I'm not getting on that." You know, it was just overdone. And Tipper said, "Nah, we'll walk. I'm not getting on that thing." Yes.
Yeah, go ahead.
I just read a little bit of your, kind of a summary of your book as I was just looking you up. And the main character, Bix, is that someone you knew, or is it you, or is it like an amalgam of stories that you've heard? Or?
It's all of the above. It's an amalgam of stories. It's me. My last name is pronounced Jacques, and years ago, and I just had been reduced to just Jacques. And even the big guy these days, just Jacques. Even fetuses on the campaign, Jacques. So, and I was like that, and I told the story earlier that my very first lead advance I ever did was for the White House during Carter, was to Davenport, Iowa, to a Coliseum ballroom. You know, Vice President Mondale doesn't get crowds, let me put it that way, and I've got a Coliseum ballroom I've got to fill at noon on a weekday. That's not going to happen. Anyway, but they were getting ready at that point. It really stuck in my mind. They're for the Bix Beiderbecke Jazz Festival. And at the same time, I was in school. And so we're doing jazz history, I'm doing an elective, and we're hitting jazz, Bix Beiderbecke hard. And I'm meeting people who actually knew him back in the 20s before he died. It was kind of weird. And I always thought, well, that'd be a good name for a lead. And that's where it came from. But it's, that's based on my experiences through doing advance for 36 years, off and on.
Any other questions?
Yes, yes.
Steve, I want to give you credit. I attended your 10 years ago when you came here.
I remember.
You totally changed I followed politics for many years, and you've changed, like you've talked earlier before, of how I look at TV and radio and newspapers. You were a great educator to me.
Well, thank you.
Because up to that point, I thought the camera, when they had a TV interview, the camera just set up somewhere, and the people behind the picture were just, they just happened to come by. But I want to compliment you. You made me a skeptic.
Thank you. Thank you. Made me one, too.
I think we had another hand up somewhere.
Just because there's nobody else who wants to ask a question, I'm going to ask now a third question. I had heard over the years that Michael Deaver was given credit for creating the Reagan visuals, and that he was the person who, for lack of a better way of putting it, was the creator of this idea that the backdrop for a candidate's speech or a president's speech is practically more important than the content of the speech. And what I'm hearing from you today is your work predates that. So is the credit that Deaver gets for it undeserved?
No, my guess is he probably was fulfilling that role in the Reagan administration. He had the research behind him to be able to make the bold statements that he did. And for those of you who don't know what statements he made, early in the Reagan administration, like 82, 83, Leslie Stahl with CBS News at the time sent over a report to the White House, the Reagan White House, that was going to air that night on the evening news to get their feedback. And it was negative about all the stuff that had happened, all the things that he'd promised during the campaign that had not happened, all very negative. And sent the report over to Michael Deaver. And she called Deaver and he said, "What'd you think?" She said, "What'd you think?" And he said, "That's fine." So what do you mean? It was all negative. He said, you guys don't understand it yet. I can't believe he actually told a member of the media this. But they've gotten it since. You guys don't get it yet. Turn off the sound. Turn off the sound. what are the visuals? And all the visuals in this report were all the campaign visuals of him with flags and bunting and balloons and kids and babies, and it was all beautiful. And so he was the first one to really out everybody. But I remember in '76, every first-time advanced person would ask, "What's the visual?" Even if they didn't know the meaning of it. But as time has gone on, I've gotten a greater and greater appreciation just because I've done the research and I'm a marketing person. But people get most of their information from visual images, and you have to create compelling ones, or or lose it, or what's either and know the difference between ineffective ones like a blank wall or bad ones. If you remember Michael Dukakis in a tank with the helmet. Now, come on, that guy got promoted. Or Sarah Palin in 2008 being interviewed on live television in front of a live turkey beheading operation with the blood and the whole bit, right in the background. So you've got to be able to know, but the fact that he told some of the media, and as a result, back in the day, during the '70s, we would do these bigger, broader visuals, and we called them non-paid political ads. We wanted them to be that. The media has, through the years, gotten smaller and smaller, so we couldn't have it be our non-paid political ad. So in the early '90s, we started doing what you see here. Wallpaper, step and repeat. So anywhere you looked in this little frame, you're going to see a little bit of the message. Bridge to the 21st century for the re-elect in '96. Got some great visuals for that. Bridge to the 21st century. So it has evolved through the years to, and my feeling was, and it's true, if you give them something, give the press something they can't not take. And I give them massive visuals, and I've been, I won't get into the references from the '30s and the bad guys that were using massive visuals at the time. But, taking that, the bad guys from the '30s using big visuals at the rallies, they will use it. And for the Topeka Brown versus Board of Education thing I did in 2004, it was almost poetic what they did with all the different visuals and scenes and over the shoulder and a cherry picker, 25 feet tall, that they could take and look at the whole scene. And then these big things that I did in 2 days that said opportunity, education, equality, education, and opportunity, 25 feet tall behind him. Very dramatic. And so yes, we were doing it. He just called out on it. And my guess is he was doing it more adeptly. Republicans know, because you'll see the same visuals, campaign after campaign after campaign, candidate after candidate after candidate. They had the institutional memory to know what worked and to be able to go back to the exact same setting and use the exact same visuals. Presidential campaign through presidential campaign, you'll see it. It's amazing. Institutional memory and what works.
Some of you may know, those of you who know me pretty well know that I worked in the Reagan White House, and so I knew Mike Deaver reasonably well. And he had been with the president forever when he was governor and everything. And we had actually, when I got here, in fact, you would have been here for that, the first presidential lecture series we did on Reagan. Mm-hmm. And I don't know if you were at the program that we did with the Reagan advancement or not. But we had 3 of President Reagan's advanced men come in, and they talked about their craft. And they didn't create advance, but they really were extraordinarily, as Stephen says, extraordinarily good at it. And Mike Deaver was the one who trained everybody and kind of.
Isn't the greatest piece of advance work ever done Reagan's speech at the Brandenburg Gate?
That was good. I mean, it's always arguable to see the best piece of advance work ever done. I mean, what you had to overcome, or I mean, it varies what you mean by that. But that was a good, without a doubt. That's a good image.
At 8 a.m.
Tear down this
Central
wall.
Time. It was on the Today Show. I mean, it was done perfectly.
And it's tougher and tougher because the competition for a piece of people's minds is much greater these days to create an image that sticks with people. So it's kind of tough to do. But sure, yeah, that's among the best of all time.
And wouldn't you say, Stephen, it's a lot easier to do advance work for a president as opposed to a candidate, or for a well-heeled or very popular candidate as opposed to one of a huge group?
Oh, well, yeah. It's if you've got somebody who's got the resources, without a doubt. It depends. Candidate versus president, you can be more creative when you're doing candidate advance and you're out there on your own. And, it's more fun from that standpoint. You can really kind of be more creative and create a real production. Much more prescribed for a president. For a president, it's extremely difficult to screw up. A 3-year-old could do it because there's so many layers of support that it's extremely difficult to screw up during advance for a president. Vice president's a little tougher because you don't have quite the same level of support, but then you don't have quite the same level of media scrutiny. I think the toughest is First Lady advance, because the media scrutiny is almost as much as the president, but the resources at your disposal are much, 100 times less than for the president. So for me, doing First Lady advance, which I haven't done in this administration, but that's done in previous administrations, really tough.
Okay.
What is the intensity of advance
work? Wait and repeat your question.
What is the level of intensity for advance work for ex-presidents?
Much lower.
Even with a Bill or Bill Clinton?
Oh yeah, much lower. I mean, first of all, there's not as much Secret Service, and there's not the number of Secret Service doing advance. There'll be one person doing advance, a few with him. And they're not driving in a motorcade. They may have 2 cars max, maybe just one. Much less. I mean, I've done one Bill Clinton trip just after I came back, actually, from doing the first one for Obama in February of 11, and had him. Was at the Truman Library. Much more low key. I mean, everything just it's just much more pleasant, and it's more low key doing vice presidential too a little bit. Just the amount of media scrutiny is less. Unless you got a groper.
Okay, so we're gonna take one more question.
Kind of to follow up on that one. When Obama was here, for some reason I was shocked he stayed at the Holodome. It was like, really? But then they said, well, there's so many people, that's the only place there's room. I mean, how many people travel for something like that, and does the press stay in the same hotel and stuff? I mean, what are the logistics of something like that trip?
And it was clear to me from the get-go why he was staying there, because it was probably the only place big enough to pull in a motorcade. And traveling press in a situation like that, there may be 10, there may be 20, 25, but probably because they have to pay for their own way, and it's not cheap to go on Air Force One. There's a few slots on Air Force One, a few places, like 20 maybe. Maybe more depending on the size of the trip. So there's going to, I mean, it's more the number of cars is, I mean, staff, yes, it's grown because it's presidential. I'm trying to give you exact numbers, but it's the size of the motorcade on a presidential thing because of all the security vehicles. It's that really, you got to have a parking lot big enough as well as enough rooms. And to do it at the last minute and to find a place that has enough rooms without kicking out, they can't kick people out. So it's kind of tough. So it didn't surprise me in the least that they were staying there. They couldn't stay at the Eldridge. I mean, how are you going to pull that off? Yeah, it's just logistics, and they're not proud. Obama doesn't have a thing for having. He talked about when we went to Vegas, and they kept sending me back even after he was president, and he said that he stayed in a nice suite when he was running for president, but since he'd been president, they'd upgraded him. It was a different suite, and it was an upgraded suite. I couldn't believe they had one that was upgraded, but it was bigger.
Okay, Stephen, thanks a lot for joining us.
It was fun. Thank you so much. Thank you. Thank you. Appreciate it.
Thank you all for coming out. We've got Stephen's book outside. You can buy a copy, get him to sign it, and then he's going to be hanging around. We've got some nice refreshments out there, I think right out in Hanson Hall. So enjoy that and take a chance to get to know our author a little bit better. And thank you all for coming out today.
Thank you. Thank you.